Okay, hi, yes, thanks. I am going to talk a little bit about mind embodied. So, my name is Heath. I'm an associate professor in the psychology department. I'm relatively new here. I started last August. So, what I'm going to be talking about is sort of the development of the lab here. And I'm excited for this opportunity because this is a way to sort of introduce what I'm trying to do with the lab and students in the lab and hopefully meet some people. The lab that I am beginning to develop, I'm calling the Create Lab, and hopefully by the end of this, we'll have an appreciation for why I'm calling it that. Okay, so the research question that I'm interested in, and I've been interested in this question pretty much since my undergrad, is a very simple, basic, fundamental question. I could show you a picture like this, and I could ask you, what is this? And you could say, okay, well, that's a hammer. And I go, yes, yeah, that's a hammer. And then I could say, okay, well, what can you do with hammers? And then maybe you'll look at the person next to you and you'll say, what's this person crazy? What can I do with this? Use it for hammering. And I go, yes, yeah, okay, great. You could use it for hammering. And I could push this a little bit and I could say, okay, so you've told me what it is and what you typically do with it, but now I want you to come up with something creative to do with this. So we could even just try this. I know it's early in the morning, but this is a type of task that we would do. So here's a picture. It's of a hammer. Can anyone give me something creative that you could do with a hammer? So not hammering a nail, but something different, something novel, something creative. Scratch your back. Open a beer. Perfect. um, and again, so we could do this, right? And all of these tasks reflect this very mundane ability that we have, which is, oh, sorry, here's a couple of other examples. We had good examples. I had this in case we had poor examples. Um, So, right, we could connect these two together, cut a groove or a tablet, saw the handle short, create coat hangers. We could think about this. And all of this mundane ability, what is that? What can I do with it? What are the creative things I could do with it? These are things that we do all the time, day to day in the world, and it reflects the capacity for us to have and use knowledge. And so my research question is centered on this, which is how does the brain produce knowledge? What are the brain changes? What are the types of activity patterns that give rise to our mundane ability to say, that's a hammer, I could use it for hammering, or I could make a coat hanger out of it. So there are a couple of different ways as a researcher you might approach the question of knowledge in the brain. And the history of neuroscience sort of has approached it with this idea that your brain is kind of like in a vat. There are inputs, you could hear things, you could see things, and then your brain does stuff, and that's us thinking. And then there are outputs. You can move your muscles to act on the world. So from this view, knowledge then becomes or is thought to reflect information in the brain. Note that our bodies, the fact that the brain is in a body, our emotions, the actions that we perform with our body is irrelevant for understanding knowledge. And really, the approach sort of suggests that thinking really is the goal of having knowledge for humans. The lab that I'm establishing and the research that I'm doing with students sort of respects this approach and how productive it's been, but pushes against it a little bit and says, well, actually, if we think about it, the brain is in a body. We do have bodies. The bodies that we have particular shapes and can do particular things. And we're in particular environments with artifacts that we create and other people that we're trying to work with. And all of this interacts. So that's what these arrows are supposed to indicate. The brain is interacting with the body's interacting with the world is interacting with the brain, et cetera, et cetera. So from this perspective, what we're actually interested in, if we're thinking about knowledge, is sort of a system. The brain is part of this larger brain-body environment system. Here, with this perspective, body and emotions and actions will actually play key roles in how we produce and demonstrate knowledge. And the goal of having a brain and having knowledge shifts from thought to producing successful action, or successfully interacting in the world. Now, in case this sounds a little too theoretical or philosophical, it is a little bit. But how we approach knowledge and the study of knowledge in the brain and how we construe this has potentially very profound impacts for how we organize society. So take educating children, for instance, which we think is an exercise in producing knowledge. If we think that information in the brain is knowledge and the body and emotions are irrelevant and thought is the goal, then perhaps we're going to try to teach people by putting them in desks, having them face the front, having a teacher give some instructions. Hopefully there's some brain changes happening that reflect learning, and then people can show us what they've learned, through tests or something like that. But the approach that we're trying to take and that I'm advocating here says the brain's part of the world. And if we look at the production of knowledge, how we learn and how we show we've learned, this happens in environmental context, right? We are engaging with the world. We are using tools often with other people. We are emoting with other people. Emotions are helping drive the expression of learning, et cetera, right? So the approach, the view of knowledge might shape how we consider what it means to have knowledge in a brain and produce knowledge. So all of this is to say the approach that I'm trying to take is studying the brain in an action-oriented neuroscience. And so formally, some people call this embodied cognition. This is a phrase that maybe some of you have heard. It can be summarized pretty straightforwardly with this notion that the body and the experiences that we have of a body, the experiences that our body permits, shape our minds, right? And therefore shape the knowledge that we can have. Okay. So the question then is, well, how have I been trying to study the brain in an action-oriented neuroscience? What are the types of studies that I'm doing with students and the types of studies in the lab that I'm establishing here? So we are very much interested in the brain. So we use techniques to measure the brain. The conference is called Brainwaves, and so one of the things we are in fact interested in is brainwaves. And so the lab that I'm establishing here is focusing on this technique of electroencephalography, EEG. The idea is we put electrodes on a scalp. The electrodes sit over top of the brain on the surface of the scalp, and the brain's producing patterns. It's doing things. It's changing as we learn and as we express learning. And we could record this. And so what I'm showing here is just a schematic of such a recording. You can imagine that this is a top-down view of the skull from the top. So the nose is here and the ears are here. And what's color-coded is the electrical potential change through time. And we do this by bringing people into the lab. We slap one of these caps on them, and I get them to sit at a computer and basically do the tasks and demonstrate the mundane abilities that I just had you demonstrate. What is this? What can you do with this? What are some creative things that you can do with this while we record brainwaves? I just want to give two examples of some of the sets of studies that that we've conducted and that we're continuing to conduct, to sort of try to emphasize how this is an assessment of these brain-body environmental interactions that I'm talking about. So I recently published a set of studies where I trained people to become Martian archaeologists. That is to say, I had them come into the lab and I said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to pretend that you are going to Mars and you are going to be an archaeologist. We think there might be aliens up there, old civilization or something. You're going to dig in the Martian sand to uncover artifacts, but given the hostile environment, the hostile Martian environment, we need to train you to use special tools that you have never seen before. So we created a set of tools. They look kind of weird, they look similar, but they are actually different. We gave them funny names, and because you haven't learned to use them, they are meaningless to you. But over the course of 4 days, I brought people in and I taught them how to use this. So we had fake Martian sand in a sandbox in the lab, and and I was teaching them how to dig in this sand with these tools, and they could be used in different ways. So I'm just demonstrating two ways in which these tools were used, one maybe more intuitive, one less intuitive. And then after training, after the 4 days, I gave people a series of behavioral tests, and I'm measuring their brain. And what we're interested in is how the brain has changed and what sort of activity patterns arise, having had learned about these tools in the particular action contexts that they did. That is, they learned how to use them in particular ways, and they learned to use them for particular outcomes. And what we're trying to do is, using mathematical techniques, some of the techniques that we've talked a little bit about already, machine learning techniques or decoding techniques, what we're trying to uncover are patterns that reflect or demonstrate changes that emphasize the embodied learning. More recently, I've been focusing on the question of the creative use of objects. So again, I can show you something like a hammer and just say, with no other instruction, just say, can you think of something creative to do with this? But if we're interested in the interactions between brain and body, this suggests that sort of the state of your body can influence your creative output. So one very easy way of looking at this is to actually manipulate the state of people's bodies while they're trying to be creative. And we do this in a couple of different ways. What I'm demonstrating here is a very simple way that's popular. These are two different types of movements or states of the body that you could produce: flexion and extension of your limbs. So flexion is sort of your lifting up, moving your arms up in the world. Extension is your sort of letting them fall or pushing them down or behind you. And the idea is I could ask people or put people's bodies into these states and get them to do this mundane creativity task. And the idea is that if the state of the body and the body is relevant for producing creative outcomes, then the state of your body should affect your performance. Now, we're interested not just in whether or not people become, say, more or less creative, which there is some evidence that they do. But what we're particularly interested in, how does the state of the body change the expression of your creativity? That is, how do you use knowledge differently depending on the state of your body? Right. So the message that I want to leave people with is this idea that we can study the brain in an action-oriented way. What it requires is us to consider the ways in which the brain is changed as a reflection of our embodied experience and how that serves our successful action. And by studying these interactions, we hope to illuminate and understand and characterize sort of learning in the real world, learning and the expression of knowledge that we see every day in our mundane day-to-day lives. Thank you. I'm on social media if people do that still. I think some people do. I'm calling the lab the CREATE Lab, which is Collaborative Research in Empirical and Theoretical Embodiment. That is a mouthful, but the acronym is CREATE. And yes, we study creativity, but the idea here is that this is a research lab that's interested in the way mind, bodies, and environments create, or brain, bodies, and environments create the mind. And this, I do want to take the opportunity that I want to emphasize the collaborative nature that I'm seeking here with students and other researchers at Memorial University. I'm happy to be here and I'm happy to meet people. And anyone who's interested in this, I'd love to talk more about it. Thank you very much.